Hi, everybody. Welcome back. It's me. I'm Wayne Hoffman, president of Idaho Freedom Action, and we're joined today as part of our IFA spotlight of the heroes of the last legislative session. Brian Lenney is a senator from Canyon County, a freshman, and welcome to the program, Brian.
Hero, I'll take it.
Well,
I'm a
hero, because I mean, you actually had a really good voting record, and that's like finding a diamond in a coal mine. It's very challenging. But last legislative session, the Senate has improved dramatically, and you're part of the improvement. So thank you.
yeah, no, I tried to do everything I ran on, fiscal accountability, that type of thing, voting, um, more skewed towards, individual freedoms and liberty over corporatism or what's best for the state. But as you know, and probably most people watching this, most people in the legislature care more about what the man on the what do they call him? The gentleman on the second floor thinks of them than the actual voters. So yeah, the Senate was really fun. I had a great time.
What was a
Um,
surprise for you?
gosh, it's stuff that it wasn't, you know, um, something I already knew, but when you're actually in it, as my first session, you actually see it and experience it. It's actually quite shocking. Probably the biggest one that comes to the top of mind is the absolute waste of time that happens daily. So we waste a lot of time. For example, I'm on Senate Education Committee. We didn't even hear a single bill in that committee for over a month. So that's, our session is 3 months long. For over a month, we didn't even hear one bill. So the time wasted that we could have been hearing bills. I know you probably know, but I know there's other legislatures out there who have a mandated, I want to say it's Texas, but that sounds wrong, but it might be correct. But there's some legislatures who have 60 days. So part-time legislatures, they say, you guys have 2 months to get it done. They get in there. Sure, there's still time wasted, but we just waste a lot of time getting presentations and lectures and PowerPoints when we could be debating and bills and pushing bills through the system. So that was probably the biggest one, is how much time is wasted. And I think it's all by design and
What,
intentional. But
yeah, Texas meets, by the way, biennially. So, you'll be in session next year, 2024, and Texas will not be. What you say it's intentional? What do you think the intention is of that?
so this is just my general thoughts. I haven't, you know, the way I kind of look at it, or I understand it, is it's like an inverted pyramid. We start in the beginning with a lot of free time, and that's just natural anyway. It's like there's no bills to debate on week one because it's week one. But I think it's to ram everything through at the end, to cram everything through at the end, to wear people down mentally. And this is just my personal thoughts. No one's told me this, but just taking a step back and reading between the lines. If you have a bunch of bills coming right at the end, for example, all the budget bills, a lot of really controversial bills were like the last day of session, last few days of session. We had bills sitting in the 14th amending order. And for people who don't know what that is, it's like a parking lot for bills is what I call it. So they just leave a lot of bills on the shelf, is probably a better way to put it. Then the last few days of session, like, oh yeah, we got to do this. Boom, 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 boom. And I would think it would be to mentally maybe wear people down. Just so a lot of people want to go home at that point, which I don't care. I don't care. I'm in Nampa. It's a 25-minute drive for me. I'm like, I'll stay here till midnight every day until we get the proper work done. But I think they just want to overload people with probably bills and legislation. So they just say, yeah, just vote for it, get it off my plate. Sure, let's do it. And I realize the financial bills, there's a process from JFAC, so those have to come toward the end. But I mean, to go a month without hearing a bill when we had bills ready to hear day one, actually, like for instance, 1038, our school choice bill. That's purely conjecture on my part, though.
What do you think is the biggest problem facing the state of Idaho that you want to tackle as a state senator?
There's, oh man, I don't know if it's a tackleable problem. I don't know. That's probably not a word. Let me maybe try to address it in a few ways. I think the biggest problem facing the state of Idaho politically, oh man, it is, but I think this isn't, this isn't unique to Idaho. It's just statism. You know, there's a guy I go to a cigar lounge with who's an anarchist, but like not, you know, burning down. He's a respectable gentleman and stuff, but he always calls me a statist, which I think is funny. But I'm like, well, if you're an anarchist, anyone who believes in any kind of rule of law, I guess, would be a statist. But what I mean when I say that is people who, kind of what I alluded to earlier, people who are, their mindset, and a lot of these are really good people and we get along great as far, and you know, you're the same way. You have people on your podcast and stuff who you completely disagree with, but socially you get along just fine. It's the mindset that I'm here to do what's best for the state and make the state money, full stop. And citizens and voters and constituents are an afterthought or a close second, maybe not even a close second. So I'd say that's the biggest problem. How you tackle that, as how I tackled that as a state senator, you know, that's the demon's in very deep on that. It's not, you know,
Well, I mean,
you have to chip away at it. So
yeah, I mean, an example of that, which I haven't written about yet, but I need to at some point, is and it seems really, and it probably is very small, but it kind of gives you a feel for, I think, what you're talking about. There was a bill that passed last legislative session to expand the tax deduction for child care, the dependent care credit, and basically, or deduction, dependent care deduction. It's not a huge amount of money, but essentially, if you're a working parent and you send your kid to daycare, then you get a tax deduction. If you're a stay-at-home mom, however, or a stay-at-home dad, you don't get a tax deduction because that's not the same thing. Because you haven't spent any money on childcare. You've just managed to take care of your kids at home because the state is interested in having you work. And so what that means is that the state wants you to be out, you know, making money so that you can pay taxes. And so your ability to generate revenue is more important than, you know, a functional household with thriving children who connect with their parents. I mean, am I putting words in your mouth? Perhaps, I don't know. Tell me what you think.
that's one example of many. I mean, the discussion around, and this has been, you've had this discussion way longer than I have, is, for example, like grocery tax. It should be a pretty slam dunk easy thing. Is it going to change people's lives financially? If we just push, well, we could. If we just pushed a button and got rid of it, it's not going to just blow up my bank account. But the principle of being taxed on food in a time of hyperinflation, I know it's gone down a little bit, but comparatively, it should be an easy thing to do. But the discussions and the pushback, and I know there's certain people and personalities who like taxing people on their food, but the pushback is always like, well, if we that I heard a lot personally, well, if we get rid of the grocery tax, how are we going to make up that revenue? Which for me, that's not even a thought that's in my head. How are we going to make up that revenue? But it's those little things, and sometimes people don't even catch them. They don't even realize they're doing it. Where right. I'm like, I'm not here to make the state money. I'm not, like, right. we have record surplus. Like, we have enough money, had enough money. It's, you know, that's slowly going away. But my concern isn't making the state money, is my point. My concern is doing what's best for my neighbors and my kids and the people of Idaho and people in Nampa. And that's my first concern. Making the state money probably doesn't even make that's probably not on any list that I have. So, I mean,
which probably drives into another policy that you voted against, which is the launch program. Here's what is $100 million so that we can take $8,000 apiece to any high school student who goes into an in-demand career, with the point being not to make people's lives better, but to make businesses, make the training of employees easier on certain businesses, select businesses, so that those businesses can generate revenue for the state. But you have to work for that. You spend more of your time as a human being generating the tax revenues so the state can pay for that program.
Yeah, and that's not even to get into, I know there was, we don't need to rehash all the debate, but obviously voted against that. But we have no, I think Brent Crane, who's my, what's the term? We're
Seatmate,
both in this, my co-chair,
district mate.
not co-chair. What's the word I'm looking for?
Well, some people say seatmate, district mate.
Seatmate. I hate that word because it makes it sound like someone you sit next to, but I guess technically, yeah. So Brent Crane is a representative in District 13. I'm a senator for District 13 is what I'm trying to say. Had a brain fart for a minute. But Brent Crane said it beautifully, and I stole this line when we debated this on the Senate floor. Brent Crane, when they debated the launch bill on the House, he said, "We have no business doing this. Like it shouldn't even be a thought in our head, because as I think it was it Milton Friedman? He said, there's no program more permanent than a temporary government program." So with the launch program, we have no
Reagan, but
business.
still, yeah.
Who was it?
Reagan, but
Reagan.
you
Well,
know,
they all
if you want to
steal from each
use
other.
if you want to use Friedman, he said there's no such thing as a free lunch. So there's that.
Yeah, the concept is still right. I haven't had my coffee yet this morning, weirdly, even though it's 10 o'clock as we're speaking. But I mean, that same, we have no business doing that. That's not, we didn't get sent there to create these job programs. And then something I called the launch program light. There was another one to do CTE, career technical education, for public schoolers. That was another, I think, I want to say it was $50 million, something in that neighborhood. Another, just here's $50 million for CTE programs, which I'm obviously, maybe it's not obvious, I am for career technical education, but that shouldn't be at the expense of academic proficiency. So I argued against that. I said, what are we're investing. Last session, if you take a step back and look at some of the things that passed and some of the things that were argued against, which illustrates my point, we're investing in how do we create good workers? How do we create, I said actually in one of my committee meetings, this program is going to create a bunch of dumb welders. Yeah, it'll create a welding job for them, career technical education. I'm for that. But if we're not teaching them reading, writing, and arithmetic, if we're leaving that on the side and we're moving towards CTE, we should do both. But what we did last session was we just kind of left academic proficiency on the table, in my opinion, in favor of career technical education and job training for these giant corporations like Micron and stuff like that. So that's what I mean when I talk about statism. People talk about around education, at least, which is obviously a hot topic that probably always will be a hot topic. We always talk about it's for the kids, it's for the kids, it's for the kids. But when you have these people come in and present and you hear a lot of the arguments, you're hearing about buildings, you're hearing about budgets, you're hearing about administrate. You rarely hear the kids. You rarely hear about the kids unless it's conservatives or people like me from like the Idaho Freedom Caucus bringing it up. We're saying, what about the kids who can't read? What about the kids who we're falling behind? We have no business doing these programs until we shore up what we already have.
What do you think was the hardest bill for you to vote against? Because you have to vote against a lot of stuff. So what bill at least gave you pause and made you have to think twice, or maybe that your constituents have asked you about?
Oh man, it was more. I'm going to flip that question if that's okay. It was more there was a few bills I had a hard time voting for. And I'll tell you why. I really had no problem, no hangups voting against really anything I voted against, to be honest. The bill, I believe it was, I don't have my notes, but I want to say it was 292. That was the property tax bill. They rammed down our throat last minute. I had a hard time voting for that, not for ideological reasons, because I'm for property tax relief. Obviously, most people are, but I had a hard time voting for it because of the way it was presented to us. It was one of those, we had one bill went through, the Senate made a bunch of changes. We sent it back to the House, and the House said, "You guys changed our bill. No thanks." So we came up with a new bill. it was given to us on, I think it was like a 16-page bill, something like that. It was given to us on the floor. It was like the day, or not the last day, but 2 or 3 days before session ended. They handed it to us and said, okay, we're going to vote on this, before we even got a chance to read it.
They had it to caucus, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, but it was one of those things that obviously a lot of us were left out of the discussion because they had this giant bill ready to go. And we said, no, we at least have to try. So we said, okay, we'll take like a 15-minute break and read it on the floor. So I said, even in the debate, I said, I have a really, really hard time voting for this, not because I don't want property tax relief. And that bill's just a temporary fix. It's not an actual, it's a Band-Aid. It's not creating any kind of long-lasting property tax relief. Anyway, it does give, we will see property homeowners, I should say, we'll see some property tax relief because of that, but it's just a short-term gimmick, in my opinion, not a permanent solution. But, you know, even when I was voting for it, when, you know, in the Senate, we can take 60 seconds to explain our vote if we don't debate the bill. I said something like, I have a really hard time voting for this because of the way it was done. We were just given this bill last minute. Hey, here's 16-page bill. This is like stuff they do in Congress. We're voting on something we haven't really got a chance to vet or read or talk to our constituents about. But I said, I'm not going to be the guy who, you know, votes against, obviously I'm not going to vote against property tax relief, but just the way it was done really bothered me on that one, 292.
Looking ahead, what are you planning for the 2024 legislative session?
We have a lot of plans. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm a member of the Idaho Freedom Caucus, which to much people's chagrin is something completely different from Freedom Action or the Freedom Foundation. Just because we have the name Freedom in it, people get those confused. But we're a group of conservatives who are looking back to, you know, we're looking to really slow the growth of the state, to fight for the same things we fought for this last session, individual freedoms and liberties, education freedom. I think two of the things that haven't gone away, besides financial stuff, we can always argue about taxes and things like that, but all of the woke ideology, like for instance, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher ed, is still a problem. It's a big problem. People think it's just at Boise State. It's not. It's at all of our four-year universities. So there's a lot of education battles to be had. We're pushing to make education about educating children, not indoctrinating them, or you know, pushing them down a path that has anything that's anything that's not like reading, writing, or arithmetic. I talked about CTE, but our schools are failing. So that I don't think that's going away anytime soon. We have a lot of long-term structural issues that are more than we could probably get into on this podcast interview. But the way the left takes over a state, like they did in Colorado, they have a long game. Conservatives, historically, we look at what's going on today, what's going on tomorrow, where the left, and I'm not saying Democrats because the left is all encompassing of many of our Republican people as well. The left takes over a state. They say, how can we do this? They have a 10-year plan, a 5-year plan. So we're looking at the ballot initiative. What do we do with that? Because, you know, states like California were absolutely wrecked by ballot initiatives. And usually the only people who use ballot initiatives are people on the left. So we're looking at, can we gut that? Do we gut that? Should we gut that? Should we take that out? Take that off the table? That, me personally, I'm interested in that.
In getting rid of the ballot initiative?
I am, yeah, and I know but I'm not the only one. There's an appetite for that in the legislature. Things like that. We're looking at some. Gosh, I should have had my notes in front of me. I don't want to put all my cards on the table though, but it's the same thing: personal freedom, individual freedom, education freedom, financial freedom. Those things haven't gone away. So there's some major issues with, as you know, Second Amendment issues. We're talking about how do we address, you know, the Supreme Court's decision, or do we address, or how can we, you know, I don't want to say get
You're
around
talking
it.
about the ruling from Sandpoint, which basically said that if a government entity leases out a piece of their property to another organization, that organization can then restrict people from having guns in what is essentially public property.
Exactly. I think we can fix that with legislation. So we're talking to people about that, because it's amazing you have the Idaho Supreme Court voting against the Second Amendment. It just blows my mind.
It's not amazing. It's not surprising at all, because when the governor makes appointments to the Supreme Court, at least near as I can tell, he never asked the question to the candidates, are you a Ruth Bader Ginsburg or an Anton Scalia? And so that's why you have several justices who have voted not only against the Second Amendment, but have voted against pro-life protections for the unborn, on the Idaho Supreme Court.
Yep. There's still, speaking of that, it's so I guess the big picture, because I don't have my notes or anything in front of me, there's a lot of things we're working on, but it's the people I'm working with and on these things, it's the same. It's trying to keep Idaho conservative. The people of Idaho are very conservative in my estimation. The legislature is still not as conservative as the people. I mean, we still have abortion issues. There's an abortion issue. It gets really, we could get way in the weeds, but again, but there's an abortion issue in the state still where the left says we've gone too far and Idaho is, draconian. I don't think we've gone far enough. You can still effectively use emergency rooms as abortion clinics. There's a loophole, might be the word for it, but there's a way that, and that has to do with the way our abortion law is written, complying with federal regulations, where technically emergency rooms can now be used as abortion clinics, for lack of a better word. So there's still a lot of work to do. We got a lot of work done. There's still a lot of work to do. It's just, it's a war. It really is a war. It's a battle.
There's also a loophole in House Bill 71, the bill that deals with young people and gender mutilation. And right after that bill passed, you had St. Luke's, I believe it was St. Luke's, that put out a statement or a message to practitioners that said, we're trying to figure out a way around this. And the way around that might be to take people and refer them to clinics in other states to get the same procedures done at taxpayer or insurance expense from Idaho.
Yeah, so a lot of it is, some of this stuff you don't see until, a lot of it is shoring stuff up. But I think my shot across the bow is I'm looking at Idaho. I grew up as a child and a young adult in a leftist state. I've been here 13 plus years in Nampa, same district, same city. And I'm looking at what Idaho could become, because I've lived in a state that was taken over by the left. And I'm looking at what it is now. And I'm looking at, in recent history, more recent history, Colorado, which used to be a lot like Idaho, that was very intentionally targeted and is now a blue state. That's where Idaho's headed. So I think my big takeaway for people who aren't involved or who are just kind of sitting on the sidelines is you have to get in the game. If you don't get in the game, whether that's door knocking, volunteering, finding out how to get involved at the precinct level, which is local politics, which is very, very important, state level politics. If you're just going to sit on the sidelines, then Idaho is going to be Colorado in the next 10 years. We're going to be a blue state. So we're fighting that, the what do they call it? The Great Gem State Heist. I think people should go watch. Something I would suggest is people go watch the Great Rocky Mountain Heist. You can find it online. It's actually on my website, I believe. If you go to votelenny.com, I have it on the bottom on the homepage. If you scroll down, I have it embedded, unless that changed or something. But I believe it's on my website at votelenny.com. But go watch the Rocky Mountain Heist by Michelle Malkin. That's what we're facing in Idaho.
I haven't watched that, but I have read the Blueprint, which is a book about the same thing, how Colorado was taken over. The thing that's missing from that book, in my opinion, is the way in which the Republicans in that state tried to ameliorate the movement towards leftism by becoming more leftist themselves. And then the voters then decided they were better off just voting for the real thing. They just voted for Democrats instead of leftist Republicans. Does Michelle cover that in her film?
I don't, not specifically. I don't think, but that's a good
Because I
point.
think that's the real issue. That's what's happening here in Idaho. And I was going to ask you because you're in Canyon County. Canyon County hasn't elected a Democrat to the legislature since 1982. And however, it hasn't on paper, that's true, but in reality, it's been electing a lot of Democrats, if you will, or shall we say leftists to the legislature, and you can name them. I mean, going back to Dorothy Reynolds, who was an actual Democrat representing Canyon County, then she switched over to the Republican Party. You've got people more recently like Jerome Wagner or Greg Cheney, Patty Ann Lodge, who was a lifetime Republican, but man, her voting record is indistinguishable from a lot of Democrats. And now here you are as a Republican who actually votes conservatively. How are you being accepted by the remaining Republicans in Canyon County? Are they on your side, or are they still? Oh, well, I mean, one of the bigger examples is probably Butch Otter, who's from Caldwell, who by the time he finished his political career was as left of a governor as they come. How does the old guard from Canyon County feel about you?
The old guard, not so great. The new guard, I'm fitting in very well. For example, so I'm at the Canyon County Republican Central Committee, I'm an alternate precinct committeeman. So I actually just last week I had to go in as an alt, and the CCRCC is
That's
up
the
there with,
Canyon County Republican Central Committee.
correct, yeah, and that's, for people who don't know, that's as local politics as you can get, and it's very important. People think it's a free thing, we meet once a month. It's very important to have good people there. So that's a very, very conservative group, and that's just in the last few years. It's become a very, very conservative group. The old guard, you're right, the old guard does not like me. I mean, I've had people say stuff about me who, for example, the old mayor of Nampa, not the current mayor, the 2 mayors ago, Tom Dale. When I won the primary last year, the Press Tribune, they interviewed, I don't know why, they interviewed Tom Dale about it. And he's like, I don't know who this Lenney guy is, but I don't like him. But when you read the interview, he said, I don't know who he is, never heard of him, even though I've met him several times. But I mean, he's the mayor. Mayors meet a lot of people, so I don't really care. But he's basically like, I don't know who this guy is, but I don't like him. Like, you don't even know who I am. You've never heard of me, but you don't like me. But they don't like me because I replaced one of their guys, Jeff Hagenbrod, until I beat him by 15.2% in the primary, had never had an opponent. So he was in the Senate for 6 years. No one had ever run against him. That's by design. That's not an accident. The establishment liked him. They said, don't run against Jeff. He's our guy. And then in 2020, I, like a lot of the people in Idaho, woke up and said, what the hell's happening to our state? And I'm going to run for something. And I did. So yeah, the old guard. I mean, you have the old guard, though, to your exact point. A lot of the old guard in Canyon County was voting for and supporting Democrats in the last election. Tom Arkush comes to mind, amongst others, because you have these establishment moderate to liberal Republicans. And when real conservatives come in and try to act conservative and vote Republican and vote in line with our GOP party platform, they have this reaction like, oh, the far right. I'm like, no, we're the regular right. In the 1980s, we'd be right in the, we're not far right. We're just, you guys have drifted so far to the left. So their gut reaction is, oh, we better, exactly what you said. They're supporting Democrats and running to moderates or liberal Republicans. But yeah, you're exactly right. We haven't elected a Democrat officially, but there's been a lot of people in there. You can, you know better than I do, obviously. You can look at people's voting records, just put them on a spreadsheet, take all the fluff out, look at yes votes and no votes, and you can line up Democrats and Republicans in Idaho. And there's Republicans who actually vote worse than Democrats in many cases.
There's some who there's really no daylight between them. They vote alike 90% of the time, which I think was the case of, if I remember right, with Jeff Fagenbrod, that his voting record was that 90% correlated to the most leftist Democrat in Boise. And that's not because the Democrats in Boise are super conservative. It's because that they just vote alike. And you mentioned statism earlier, and that's a big word, that used to be on a billboard near Caldwell that Ralph Smead had owned, and it said, make statism unpopular, which was Ralph's goal. But to your point, a lot of Republicans have embraced statism, and they view their job as to be great administrators of government programs, where I think you view your job as getting government out of the way so people can flourish and thrive and be successful and not be supplicants to the government.
I can't improve on everything you just said. No, that perfectly sums it up. And it's not the great thing is, if I was the only one in the Senate, a lot of people don't understand too, that the Senate is on one side of the building and the House is on the other side. You don't see each other a lot during the session. Like, they're doing their thing, we're doing our thing. So I tend to look at things as in the Senate. But if I was the only one doing this in the Senate, it would be mentally exhausting. Senator Zito was in there a lot of times standing by herself. Not all the time, but a lot of times she was standing by herself. And it's great to have, we replaced somewhere around a third of the Senate in May 2022 in the primary. So it's good to have other solid conservatives in the Idaho Senate that I'm doing this with. And our numbers matter. It's not 2 or 3, it's 10 plus out of 35 people.
The Senate is dramatically different. And in fact, I was telling somebody this the other day. If you go back and you look at the voting records in the Senate, about 65-ish to 75% of the votes every year for the last 20 years has been basically 35-0. Passed through unanimous consent. Somebody standing up, and I ask unanimous consent that the roll call used for the previous bill now be used for this bill, and then it's recorded 35-0. And you can look that up fairly easily. This last legislative session, it was about 25%. So you've really turned a corner in the Senate. There's much more discussion, there's much more debate, there's diversity of opinion. It's been a dramatic turnaround as far as I'm concerned. Still more work to do, but way better than what Christie had to put up with when she was there in the 2022 legislative session, where it was her and basically Regina Bayer and sometimes just her. It really is a big difference, and you're part of that.
Yeah, we got kind of in a joking way. We had, sometimes we'd be in our Republican caucus meeting, just talking about whatever, fill in the blank on the topic. But sometimes we would hear from the leadership in a fun way, like it was kind of, we're like, hey, we want to get this done, and this done today. And I remember one time one of them said, well, you guys are debating budget bills for an hour and a half, but kind of like, come on, guys. And I'm like, but I said, yeah, but isn't that great? We're debating budget bills. Whereas just last year, and like you just said, people wouldn't debate budget bills or sometimes any bill. They just said, yes, rubber stamp, rubber stamp, rubber stamp. So yeah, we are in there. I remember the Boise State, the higher ed bill. We debated, I'm a lot of us conservatives debated twice. You're allowed to debate twice. So you get up, say your thing. Once everyone else it's like getting seconds. You can't get seconds until everyone else has had their share. We debated the budget bill based on the DEI stuff and the woke stuff. Like, why are we funding this for, I think, an hour and a half? So it is refreshing to have, for me, it was my first session, so I haven't known anything different, but I knew getting into it that we were breaking up the rubber stamp mafia. So I had a great time. I think that's my other, you asked earlier, I think the first question, the biggest surprise. And my answer was, we've wasted so much time. But my second biggest surprise was how much fun I had. Me personally, I enjoyed that type of environment and conflict and contention. And I like the debate and the pushback and the battle and the war. A lot of people don't. So my idea of a good time, if I'm having a good time, you're on like Splash Mountain, you're having a great time, and you look at the guy behind you and he's like terrified on a theme park ride. So a lot of us had a really good time. I enjoyed it, and it's a sacrifice time wise. You basically put life on hold for 3 months, but I'm happy to make that. I'm happy to have that fight and to make that sacrifice for the people of Idaho. I mean, that's why I got in it. I'm looking at my kids. My kids are still little. We have 2 teenagers and two younger ones, and I'm like, man, the Idaho I want them to grow up in, it's worth fighting for. So I'm happy to do it.
Brian, appreciate your work and appreciate having the opportunity to talk to you, and look forward to doing it again real soon.
All right.
Thanks for
Thanks.
joining us today.
All right.
All right. Be sure to join us again. We've got several more spotlights to do with Idaho Freedom Action. So we'll talk to you again in the next video.